Right now, you are wearing something. Fabric against your skin, a shirt, a waistband pressing into you that you forgot was there until this exact second. You put it on this morning without a single thought. It felt automatic, natural, like breathing. But the real answer is far stranger. Because the thing you slipped on this morning is one of the oddest things your species has ever done. No other animal on Earth does it. Not the lion, not the wolf, not the chimpanzee who shares almost all of your DNA. They walk through snow and rain and burning sun, wearing nothing but the body they were born with. And they are fine. You are not fine. Take your clothes away and put you on a cold night, and within hours, your body begins to fail. Your fingers stop working, your thinking slows. You become, in a very real sense, an animal that cannot survive its own planet without wrapping itself in the skins of other things. So how did this happen? When did your ancestors first decide that their own skin was not enough? When did a naked, hairy creature on the plains of Africa look down at itself and reach for something to cover up? And why? The answer takes you back further than you think. It takes you into caves, into ice, into the bodies of lice, into the minds of people whose names are lost forever. And by the end, it will change the way you feel about the simple act of getting dressed. Picture the world 2 million years ago. Your ancestor is not human. Not yet. It is an upright creature walking across the grasslands of East Africa. It has a body covered in hair, like every other primate. And for a very long time, that hair was all it needed. Hair is a remarkable thing. It traps a layer of warm air against the skin. It blocks the sun. It sheds rain. Every mammal on the planet wears a coat it grew itself, a coat that repairs itself, that never needs washing, that you never take off because you never need to. Your ancestor had this coat too, and then slowly it lost it. This is one of the strangest facts about your body. You are a naked ape. Of all the thousands of species of mammals walking the earth, you are one of a tiny handful that lost almost all of its fur. And no one is completely sure why. But the leading idea is heat. Around 2 million years ago, your ancestors started moving differently. They started walking long distances under the African sun. They started running. They started chasing animals across open ground for hours at a time, a hunting strategy that almost no other predator on Earth uses. And running generates heat. A body covered in thick fur, running for hours under a blazing sun, would overheat and die. So your ancestors traded their fur for sweat. You have more sweat glands per inch of skin than almost any animal alive. Millions of them. They cover your bare skin and pour out water that evaporates and cools you down. A horse sweats. A dog cannot, which is why it pants. But you are a sweating machine, and that is only possible because you stripped away the fur that would have trapped all that moisture and heat. There is another idea too. Some researchers think losing fur helped your ancestors fight parasites. Fur is a perfect home for fleas, ticks and lice. Bare skin gives them nowhere to hide. A naked body might have been a healthier body, and a healthier body might have been a more attractive one, which would have pushed the trait forward generation after generation. But whatever the exact reason, the outcome is the same. Your ancestor became naked, naked to run, naked to hunt, naked to survive the heat of the day in Africa, and for a long time that worked perfectly. But here is the twist. Africa is hot during the day. At night it gets cold, and as your ancestors spread out of Africa into colder lands, into ice and wind and snow, that beautiful naked skin became a death sentence. You had thrown away your coat, now you needed it back, and you could not grow it again. Evolution does not work backward on command. You could not simply decide to regrow fur over a few generations. The cold was coming faster than your body could change. So your ancestors did something no animal had ever done before. They borrowed a coat from another animal. This is the moment. This is where it begins. A creature with a big brain, standing in the cold, looking at the thick, warm hide of an animal it had just killed for food. And making a connection no animal had ever made. That skin kept that animal warm. It could keep me warm too. That single thought is the beginning of everything you are wearing right now. But when did it happen? This is where the story gets genuinely difficult, because clothing does not fossilize. A bone can last 1,000,000 years. A stone tool can last forever. But animal skin and plant fiber rot away in a few thousand years at most. The first clothes your ancestors ever wore are gone. Completely gone. Dust. So how do you find something that left no trace? This is where the story takes a turn that almost no one expects, because the scientists who cracked this puzzle did not dig in the dirt. They did not search for ancient fabric. They studied something far stranger. They studied lice. In 2003, a biologist named Mark Stoneking had an idea so clever it sounds almost like a joke. He realized that the answer to when humans started wearing clothes might be living right now in human hair and human clothing. Here is the logic. There are two kinds of lice that live on the human body. There is the head louse, which lives in the hair on your scalp. And there is the body louse, which is different. The body louse does not live on your skin. It lives in your clothing. It clings to fabric, crawls onto your skin to feed, and then crawls back into the cloth. It cannot survive without clothes. It evolved specifically to live in them. Do you see where this is going? The body louse could not exist before clothing existed. It had nowhere to live. So at some point in the past, the head louse and the body louse were the same animal. And then humans started wearing clothes and a new habitat appeared, a warm fabric world, and some lice moved in and slowly became a brand new species adapted to it. So if you could measure how long ago the body louse split off from the head louse, you would know, roughly, when clothing was invented. So that is exactly what Stoneking and his team did. They studied the DNA of lice. They measured the genetic differences between head lice and body lice and used the steady ticking of genetic mutation, the molecular clock, to calculate when the two had separated. The answer was astonishing. The body louse appeared somewhere around 170,000 years ago, possibly even earlier. And that means clothing, real worn clothing, is at least that old. Maybe older. Sit with that number for a moment. 170,000 years, long before farming, long before cities, long before writing or the wheel or anything you would call civilization. Your ancestors were already wrapping themselves in skins, already inventing the most basic version of the thing you wore today. And the lice followed them every step of the way. A tiny insect recording the history of human clothing in its DNA, waiting 170,000 years for someone clever enough to ask it. There is something poetic in that. The proof of one of humanity's greatest inventions was not carved in stone or painted on a cave wall. It was hidden inside a parasite. The history of your clothing was written by the very pest that learned to live inside it. But this raises a new question, a harder one. Why did clothing appear when it did? And why clothing at all? Because think about it. Cold is a problem with more than one solution. Your ancestors did not have to invent clothing. They could have stayed near fire. They could have huddled in caves. They could have simply moved south, chasing the warmth, the way birds do every winter. The cold does not force you to wear clothes. So why did your ancestors choose this strange path instead of another? Fire was one answer, and your ancestors used it. The control of fire is far older than clothing, stretching back perhaps 1,000,000 years. A fire warms you, it cooks your food, it keeps predators away in the dark. But a fire has a fatal flaw. You cannot carry it with you across the frozen ground. The moment you stand up and walk away from the flames, the cold reaches for you again. Fire keeps a place warm. It does not keep a person warm. Shelter was another answer. A cave, a hut, a windbreak made of branches and hide. But shelter has the same flaw as fire. It is fixed, it stays in one place. And your ancestors were not creatures who stayed in one place. They were wanderers, hunters, followers of herds, walkers of impossible distances. A shelter you cannot carry is useless the moment you leave it behind. And this is the genius of clothing. Clothing is warmth you can carry. Clothing is a fire that walks with you. It is a shelter wrapped around your body that goes everywhere you go. While the warm air sits trapped against your skin, you can walk for hours across frozen ground, hunt across open snow, cross a mountain pass, and never leave your warmth behind. No fire can do that. No cave can do that. Only clothing. That is why clothing won. Not because it was the only way to fight the cold, but because it was the only way to fight the cold while staying free to move. And movement was everything to your ancestors. Movement was survival. Clothing did not. That idea was so powerful that it let your ancestors walk into places no naked ape had any business going. Into the frozen north of Europe, across the icy land bridge into the Americas, into Siberia, where winter temperatures drop far below anything a bare human can survive for more than minutes. Think about that. Without clothing, your species would have stayed trapped in the warm band around the equator forever. Clothing is the reason humans live almost everywhere on Earth. It is the reason your ancestors could leave Africa and keep going and going until they had spread across every continent on the planet. A piece of animal skin did that. The simplest technology imaginable opened up the entire world. And it was not only your own species that did this. Your ancestors were not alone on the cold Earth. There was another kind of human living in the frozen heart of Ice Age Europe. The Neanderthals. The Neanderthals were not the dim brutes of old cartoons. They were intelligent, powerful, and superbly adapted to the cold. Their bodies were stocky and barrel-chested, built to hold heat the way a thick mug holds warmth longer than a thin glass. They survived in landscapes that would kill an unprepared modern human in a single night. And here is something fascinating that researchers have found. The Neanderthals almost certainly used animal hides for warmth, but the evidence suggests they wore them more like loose capes and wraps, draped over the body rather than fitted, tailored, sewn clothing. They processed hides, they scraped them, they used them. But there is little sign that they tailored them into snug, sealed garments. Modern humans did something different, and that difference may have mattered more than anyone realized, because how did they actually make it? The first clothing was almost certainly not sewn. It was simply draped, a hide wrapped around the shoulders, a skin tied at the waist, crude, loose, leaking heat at every gap. Better than nothing, but barely. And then came an invention that changed the game completely. A tiny one, so small you would never guess how important it was. The needle. Around 45,000 years ago, your ancestors invented the eyed needle. A sliver of bone or ivory polished smooth with a tiny hole punched through one end to hold a thread. Some of the oldest needles ever found come from a cave in Siberia called Denisova, the same cave that gave us an entire lost branch of the human family, the Denisovans. These needles are so fine, so carefully made, that they would not look out of place in a sewing kit today. Why does a needle matter so much? Because a draped skin keeps heat in poorly, but a sewn garment, stitched tight, shaped to the body, with sleeves and seams that close off every gap, that is a different thing entirely. That is a garment that traps warmth like a second skin. The needle is what turned clothing from a loose covering into engineered survival gear. And here is a thought that some researchers take very seriously. When the great cold of the last ice age tightened its grip, modern humans had tailored, fitted clothing. The Neanderthals, it seems, may not have. And in a world where the difference between a draped hide and a sewn coat could be the difference between freezing and surviving, that tiny edge may have helped decide which kind of human walked out of the Ice Age and which kind vanished from the earth forever. A needle, a piece of bone with a hole in it, It may have been one of the most important objects your species ever made. The arrival of the needle lines up with something remarkable in the archaeological record. It is right around this time that modern humans pushed deepest into the freezing landscapes of Ice Age Europe and Asia. The needle and the conquest of the cold appear together. That is almost certainly not a coincidence. Researchers like Ian Gilligan, who has spent years studying the origins of clothing, argue that clothing and the climate are locked together throughout human history. When the world froze, clothing advanced. When it warmed, clothing sometimes disappeared again. In some warm parts of the world, people wore almost nothing right up into modern times because they simply did not need it. Clothing in its origin was not about looking good, it was about not dying. And the materials told their own story. At first, there was only the hide. The skin of an animal scraped clean of flesh and fat, dried and softened and worked by hand until it became something a body could wear. This was slow, hard work. It took skill. It took knowledge passed down across generations. A badly prepared hide would rot or stiffen into something useless. A well-prepared one could last for years. But then your ancestors discovered something even more powerful than skin. They discovered thread. Somewhere in the deep past, a human looked at the long fibers inside a plant stem, or the fur shed by an animal, and realized that if you twisted those fibers together, they became something stronger than any single strand. They became string. And string, once you have it, changes everything. This is one of the most underrated inventions in all of human history. The twisting of fiber into cordage. With string, you could bind things together. You could make nets to catch fish. You could make snares to trap animals. You could lash a stone to a stick and make an axe or a spear. And you could weave. Some of the oldest evidence of this comes from places like the cave of Dzudzuana in the country of Georgia, where archaeologists found fibers of wild flax that are around 30,000 years old. Some of those ancient fibers were twisted. Some were even dyed in different colors. 30,000 years ago, someone was not only making thread, they were coloring it, making it beautiful. Some of the oldest evidence of this comes from places like the cave of Dzudzuana in the country of Georgia, where archaeologists found fibers of wild flax that are around 30,000 years old. Some of those ancient fibers were twisted. Some were even dyed in different colors. 30,000 years ago, someone was not only making thread, they were coloring it, making it beautiful. Think about what that means. The moment your ancestors had thread, they were no longer limited to wrapping themselves in whole animal skins. They could build fabric from scratch, fiber by fiber, thread by thread. They could weave a cloth that did not exist anywhere in nature. They had become makers of materials that the earth had never produced on its own. And weaving is not simple. To weave, you need a loom, or at least the idea of a loom. You need to hold dozens of threads in tension while you pass another thread over and under, building a sheet of fabric one row at a time. It is slow. It is intricate. It demands patience and planning, and a mind that can hold a complex pattern across hours of work. The first weavers were engineers, even if they never thought of themselves that way. So let's step back and see the full picture of what your ancestors built. They lost their fur to survive the heat. Then they borrowed the skins of animals to survive the cold. Then they invented the needle to seal those skins into fitted garments. Then they learned to twist plant and animal fibers into thread. And then they learned to weave that thread into cloth. Each step built on the last. Each step took thousands of years, and every single step is still inside the clothing you wore this morning. And it is worth pausing to feel how much human labor lived inside a single ancient garment. You buy a shirt today in seconds, made by machines you will never see, from cotton grown on the other side of the planet. But for almost all of human history, every thread of every garment was made by hand. By human hands, slow hands. Imagine the work. To make a single fur coat, someone had to hunt and kill the animal. then scrape the hide clean of every scrap of flesh and fat, a foul and exhausting job. Then treat the skin so it would not rot, often by working it with the animal's own brains, or with smoke, or with hours of patient stretching and rubbing. Then cut it, then pierce hundreds of tiny holes along the edges with a sharp tool. Then stitch it together with thread made from animal sinew, one careful stitch at a time, by firelight with cold fingers. A single garment could represent days, even weeks, of skilled labor. And that skill was precious. It was knowledge, held in the minds and hands of the people who knew how to do it, passed down from parent to child across uncountable generations. The person who could make good clothing was not just useful. In a freezing world, they held the power of life itself in their hands. We tend to imagine our ancient ancestors as simple, crude, half-animal. But picture the mind it takes to look at a dead animal and see in advance a finished coat, to plan every step, to hold the whole process in your head before you begin, to teach it to your children so the knowledge does not die with you. That is not a simple mind. That is the same mind that would one day build cathedrals and write symphonies and walk on the moon. It was already there in the cold sewing. But somewhere along the way, something changed. And this is the second great mystery of clothing, because at some point, your ancestors stopped wearing clothes only to survive and started wearing them to mean something. Think about your own clothes again, the ones on your body right now. Were they chosen purely for warmth? Almost certainly not. They have a color you liked, a cut you thought looked right, a brand maybe, a style that says something about who you are or who you want to be seen as. You did not get dressed this morning only to stay warm. You got dressed to be a person in the world. When did that begin? The clues are old, very old. Archaeologists have found beads made from shells, carefully pierced and strung, dating back over 100,000 years. They have found lumps of ochre, a red mineral pigment, ground down and used to color things, going back even further. These were people decorating themselves, marking their bodies, sending signals about who they were long before they could write a single word. And the moment clothing became a signal, it became something far more powerful than warmth. It became language, a way of showing your status without speaking, a way of showing which group you belonged to, a way of showing wealth or power or beauty or grief. Consider what clothing does in your world today. A uniform tells you someone's job before they open their mouth. A wedding dress tells a story everyone in the room understands instantly. A crown means power. A torn flag means defeat. A black armband means mourning. We pour meaning into fabric and we read that meaning fluently, without thinking. The way you are reading these words, your ancestors invented that language. And it may be one of the most sophisticated things humans have ever done. Because to use clothing as a symbol, you need a brain that can hold an idea like this. The thing on my body is not just keeping me warm, it is telling other minds something about my mind. That is an extraordinary leap. That is the same kind of thinking that gives you art and religion and money and everything else built on shared imagination. And once clothing became a symbol, it became a kind of power. Think of how throughout history, societies have controlled what people were allowed to wear. There were laws in many ancient and medieval cultures that dictated which colors and fabrics a person could put on their body depending on their rank. A common person could be punished for wearing the wrong dye. Certain colors were so difficult and expensive to produce that they belonged only to royalty. Purple was once worth more than gold because the dye came from thousands of crushed sea snails and only the powerful could afford it. So clothing did not just say who you were, it enforced who you were. It became a way for societies to make their hierarchies visible, to write status onto the human body in cloth and color so that everyone could see at a glance exactly where each person stood. That is an astonishing amount of meaning to load onto a thing that started as a scraped animal hide thrown over cold shoulders. And there is one kind of meaning that clothing carries that runs deeper than all the others, deeper than status, deeper than fashion. It is the feeling you get when you imagine being seen without your clothes by a room full of strangers, that hot, sinking flush of shame. Where does that come from? No newborn baby feels it. A small child will happily run naked through a house full of guests without a flicker of embarrassment. The shame is learned. It is taught. Every human culture on earth has rules about which parts of the body must be covered, but the rules are wildly different from place to place and time to time. What is shameful to reveal in one society is ordinary in another. There is no single universal line. And that tells you something profound. The shame is not in the body. The body is just a body. The shame is in the meaning your culture has stitched onto the body and onto the cloth that covers it. Clothing did not just become a way to show who you are. It became woven so deeply into the human sense of self that to be stripped of it can feel like being stripped of your very identity. To stand naked before others is in almost every culture to be made vulnerable, exposed, reduced. Think about how strange that is. A piece of fabric, an invention barely a couple 100,000 years old, has become so fused with the human psyche that its absence can cause real psychological pain. Your clothing is not only on your body, it is in your mind. It has become part of how you experience being a self at all. So the simple act of getting dressed sits on top of two of the deepest things about being human: the drive to survive and the drive to mean something, warmth and identity, the body and the self. Both are stitched into every garment you own. But let's go back to the cold one more time, because there is one final twist hiding in this story, and it is about your body. Remember that your ancestors became naked on purpose to lose heat while running and hunting, and then they invented clothing to put the heat back. But here is the strange part. Once clothing existed, your body never needed to grow its fur back. Clothing took over that job permanently, and so your nakedness became locked in. You are stuck as a naked ape, not because nakedness is good for you, but because you invented a tool that made fur unnecessary forever. In other words, clothing is not just something you use, it became part of how your species survives at all. Take it away, and you are a creature without a coat in a world that frequently tries to freeze you to death. Your clothing is not an accessory. For 170,000 years, it has been a part of your biology that you happen to keep in a closet instead of on your skin. And there is something even stranger. Your clothing has shaped your body in return. Because you wear shoes, the soles of your feet are soft and tender. A barefoot human raised without shoes grows thick, tough skin that can walk across rough ground without pain. Your soft feet are not natural, they are made by footwear. Your clothing did not just cover your body, it changed it. This is the truth that hides inside the ordinary morning ritual. When you reach for your clothes, you are completing an act your ancestors began in the freezing dark almost 200,000 years ago. You are using a survival technology so old it predates almost everything else humans have ever made. And you are speaking a silent language invented by people whose names are lost forever, but whose ideas you use every single day. Now think about how invisible all of this is to you. You do not feel ancient when you get dressed. You do not feel like you are reaching back across 2 million years of evolution and 170,000 years of invention. You just feel the fabric for a second and then you forget it is there. That forgetting is itself part of the story. The greatest technologies always disappear. When something works perfectly, you stop noticing it. Clothing has worked so well for so long that it vanished from your awareness completely. It became invisible. It became you. There is one more thing worth sitting with. Of all the technologies your ancestors ever invented, clothing is the one you carry on your skin from the moment you are born until the moment you die. You are dressed when you are brought into the world. You are dressed when you are laid to rest. Across your entire life, in almost every moment, there is fabric between you and the world. No other invention is that close to you. No other tool touches you so constantly. You live your whole life inside the oldest survival machine your species ever built, and you almost never notice it is there. But it was not always there. Somewhere in the deep past, a creature stood shivering in the cold, with the warm hide of an animal in its hands. And it had a thought no animal had ever had. And it covered itself, and nothing was ever the same again. Every coat you have ever owned, every blanket you have ever pulled over yourself on a cold night, every uniform, every costume, every thread you have ever worn. All of it traces back to that single shivering creature and that single impossible thought. So let's return to where we started. Right now, you are wearing something. You put it on this morning without a single thought. It felt automatic, natural, like breathing. But now you know, there is nothing natural about it at all. You are a naked animal wrapped in the ghost of an ancient idea, carrying on your body the oldest survival technology your species ever made, speaking a silent language older than every word ever spoken. You are not just wearing clothes, you are wearing 2 million years of being human.